number to recall. So I believe this is the third session we have on the subject of the Garden of Eden. And the title I'd like to use on this is Revisiting the Garden of Eden with a Jewish Tour Guide. And so I'm not asserting this is the truth of what happened to the Garden of Eden, but this is certainly a Jewish take on the Garden of Eden story. And I am going to pop back the screen share. And self ready here. And I presume you can see this, and I'm going to go from the current slide. So what I want to do is back up a little bit. We've been through the Garden of Eden story pretty carefully. And so there are a bunch of questions that I raise. And I think, well, we've discussed some of them, but we're going to continue discussing them. So first is, was it a sin, what Adam and Eve did in the Garden of Eden? The second is, was it entrapment? Jim, I love you're describing it as entrapment. And if it was entrapment, who is the entrapper? Entraptor? And so I think, Jim, you were arguing when you mentioned it that it was the serpent that committed entrapment. And I would agree with you, except I would say it's God that committed entrapment here.
E-R-U-P.
And then what is the meaning of the consequences? So we have, that, in the typical translation of what happens to after eating the fruit is that the woman will give birth in pain. The man will work hard and sweat for his labor. And the serpent will crawl on its belly and not, and there will be enmity, there'll be hatred between Chava's offspring, namely all of us, and the serpent's offspring. And snakes still give many of us the willies. And then, of course, the question is, did the serpent speak the truth? And so I'm going to go back and look at everything that the serpent says. And of course, I'm going to argue that everything the serpent says was true. And then the question of why were Adam and Eve expelled from the garden? And finally, what's the role of the cherubs? And what the heck is a cherub anyway? So any thoughts before I dive into this?
Oh, God. What is cherub?
Well, that's what cherubim. I don't know if you know the Hebrew, but you'll see at the end of the story, when Adam and, I'm just going to refer to her in the Hebrew, Chava, are expelled from the garden, a cherub with an ever-turning fiery sword is sent to guard the gates of the Garden of Eden. So the question is, what is a cherub? Okay. And we're going to get to it. So thank you for raising it. So, and this is something we took a look at last time, but I just thought I would review it. So the question is, was it a sin? And the Hebrew Bible never refers to what happened in the garden as a sin. Certainly Christianity does, and in fact would call it original sin, the sin of sins. The prophets who rant and rail against sin and who catalog sins against God never refer to Eden as a sin. They refer to lots of things as sin. In fact, every reference to Eden in the Hebrew Bible is a positive one, how wonderful it was in the Garden of Eden. Original sin as a concept is not a part of Judaism. In fact, the key prayer in our morning liturgy says, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahorahi. Oh God, the soul you have given me is pure. So it's, and again, many scholars believe that this was snuck into our liturgy as a subtle way of refuting the concept that our souls are in fact sinned, stained by sin, by original sin. So in our morning liturgy, we reject that idea. And the first time that the word chet, sin, is used is in connection with the story of Cain and Abel. Another very interesting story. Yeah, Jim. You're muted, Jim.
What major event in human history would lead you to believe that the soul of human beings are pure?
I would say it's not a major event. It's in our liturgy. So the question is the soul as it begins inherently impure or pure, which is to say, does it begin pure and then we by our actions stain it, or is it intrinsically stained and impure? So I would say Judaism asserts that we start with a clean slate, a pure soul, and then by our actions we can commit sins, and then by our actions we can atone for sins, but it doesn't start stained by sin. So for example, so here's an example I would, without arguing necessarily Jewish theology versus Catholic theology, a newborn baby is born. Does it have an impure soul?
Well, I don't know if you would call original sin impure, but yeah, according to Catholicism, yes.
Yes. So that would be the question. So you would say, what event in history caused this newborn baby in 2025 to have a soul stained by sin? And the answer would be the Garden of Eden story. And so I would say Judaism absolutely rejects that idea. And I said we can argue it, but I actually don't want to argue it because it's a very important matter of faith in Christianity. And God forbid that I would ever argue that Christianity is an error on this. I would just say that point is not supported by the Hebrew Bible. Okay. So was it a setup? We talked about this. If God wanted them to eat of the fruit of the tree, did God want them to eat? And if not, why place it at the center, make it so enticing, and create the serpent to tell them about it? And I talked about this idea, and we went back and forth on it. Last time we had an interesting discussion. Mom and dad leave the kids, and you don't need a babysitter. You're old enough. We trust you. And as they're about to leave, they say, "Oh, by the way, don't look in mom's upper left-hand drawer." And so, the one question is, how long before mom and dad leave the driveway do they rush to look at it? That's one point. And the more interesting point for me is, would you want to have kids that would not look at it? And there's difference of opinion about it. And I'll just close the thought and I'll call on you, Alan. And so for me, the interesting question is, can you have human free will in theory without actually demonstrating it? So this story and this take on the story, which is really after Harold Kushner interpretation, gave me a lot of peace with my kids, because ultimately I want my kids to be independent adults, which means at some point in time they're going to have to disobey me. You can't live your life as though, yes, I'm really independent from you, mommy and daddy, but I am going to do absolutely everything you say until the day I die. So to me, this is a parable about human free will. Alan.
Well, I was going to just agree with the idea of being a setup, because I never think of that phrase when it comes to staging of God setting it up. But on the other hand, the whole idea, a lot of the lessons in the Bible can be thought of as setups. There's Moses hits the rock. Well, God behind the scenes is a setup, so we learn the lesson of what's going to happen or not happen to Moses. So there's all kinds of setups. The part that you got me stuck is I'm a big fan of free will. So now, what is the setup here, right? So God wants you to use your free will, and so God knows what, and so forth. Anyway, I got a little stuck on the free will.
So
part.
there's always the three O's in theology: is
Okay.
omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent.
Right.
And I often point out that they entered Jewish theology through Islam in the Islamic period in Spain. Certainly in the Bible, there are lots of examples of where God is not omniscient, and the best example is is actually, I think we're going to touch upon it briefly. In Genesis 6:6, just before the flood, God says, God regretted having made humankind, and it pained God in God's heart that when he saw what people were doing. So if God truly was omniscient, it's hard to imagine how God would regret anything and why it would pain, you might say it would pain God. But anyway, so I often say over and over again that the Bible doesn't have a consistent theology. The Bible is a collection of stories and a collection of laws, and it's not necessarily internally consistent. But it seems to me that one of the main things we are learning in the Garden of Eden is people have free will. And it's pretty much right from the get-go. We have one commandment and we blow it. So clearly, Adam and Eve have free will. The question is, did God want them to eat the fruit? Now, this is a place where clearly Judaism and Christianity are going to disagree. And even Judaism is not necessarily consistent on that question, because that question actually is, for Judaism, is not terribly important. What's important is how you hang your mezuzah on the wall. What's important is which foods are kosher. What's important is how do you pray every day. Those are important things because they affect my life. These sort of abstract issues of theology are really interesting, but they aren't necessarily important. So let me continue, and this is the place where we left off last time, and I mentioned this is a book by Harold Kushner called "How Good Do We Have to Be? A New Understanding of Guilt and Forgiveness," and it's a very small book. It's not a long theological tome. It's very, very good. So so my analysis here is very much following Harold Kushner. And so I say, if this wasn't a sin, then there shouldn't be punishments, right? By the way, if you have no free will, if God is really in control of everything you do, then it doesn't make sense to punish people for sins, because instead of the devil making me do it, God made me do it. God didn't give me free will here. And there's a lot in Jewish theology in the Torah, in the Torah text we read on Yom Kippur. It says explicitly, I lay before you two choices, doing good and life, and doing bad and death. Choose life. So clearly God is giving us the ability to choose, and God doesn't control our choice. So what Kushner is going to propose is perhaps this is a story. The story is a parable about humanity leaving infancy or the animal world and becoming human. And so instead of punishments, these are consequences. Perhaps these consequences are really God lovingly explaining to us what it means to be an adult human. And of course, as I mentioned now several times, I'm following Kushner's book. So, and here it's very helpful and very instructive to look at the Hebrew. And of course, I never noticed this until Kushner pointed it out. My Hebrew isn't so good that I would notice these things on my own. So, to the woman, God says, I will make most severe your pangs. And the Hebrew word is ba'etzev, in childbearing. There are several other words in the Bible that specifically refer to childbirth, to pain in childbirth, such as chevel, tzair, and chayal, and I've given you the references there, and they are not used here. So the words that specifically refer to pain in childbirth are not used here. We have this interesting word etzev. To the man, God says, and I'm using a traditional translation, by toil shall you earn your bread, or shall you eat. But the interesting thing here is the word for toil is exactly the same word, ba'etzev, or etzev. So it's ayin sadi bet, and there is ayin sadi bet. The ba is a preposition, so there's a lot of Hebrew grammar going on. The nun at the end is a plural. But it's the same root. It's the woman is going to give birth in etzev. The man is going to earn his bread in etzev. So what is the meaning of etzev? it can mean toil or pain, but it can also mean to grieve. And here's the kicker. In Genesis 6:6, just before the flood, we read, as I mentioned before, the Lord Adonai regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. Here it's in a reflexive verb form, v'yit atzev, but there's the same root, ayin sadi bet. So the same thing going on in a woman giving childbirth, and a man earning his living, and the way God felt when he saw the way the world and humanity, but you could say the entire world turned out just before the flood in the time of Noah, is the same word, etzev. I think I'm going to go on and focus on this word. So, pain or etzev in childbearing. By the way, part of it is physical pain in childbearing, and I think we touched upon this last time. And part of the reason for pain in childbearing is the size of the woman's birth canal, and compared to the largest element in the child. So you have a newborn baby. Most animals do not give birth in extreme pain. In fact, I'm not sure any animals other than humans give birth in extreme pain. So what's the reason? I sort of hinted at it, but I want to take you through this. What is the reason that childbirth in humans is painful? This is
I can tell you.
Yeah, go ahead, Erwin.
Because woman is created with very narrow hip bones and very narrow birth canal.
Okay, but her hip bones are wider than a man's hip bones, but apparently not wide enough.
No, exactly.
Okay, Cindy, do you want to contribute to the discussion?
Yeah, so some evolutionary psychiatrists have hypothesized that these passages refer to the differentiation of the hemispheres. You know, most animals, both hemispheres are the same. In humans, there was an aberrance, and now we have a differentiation between the left and the right hemispheres. And at the same time, the size of our brains grew sufficiently too much and outpaced any evolution of the women's pelvis. Previous to that, childbearing was not difficult. After that, it was more difficult.
Okay, so specifically, what is causing the pain in childbirth? We have a narrow birth canal, and it's too narrow for what? Jim?
For a passage of the newborn.
A big head.
Yeah, but and Cindy, you alluded to this, and Jim, you alluded to this. The part that's difficult is the large head. Okay, and so why do humans have such large heads? This is just biology now. Farah.
I think because the brain is bigger, they can think and they can
right, because we have knowledge, right?
Knowledge, yes.
So we have knowledge of many things. You could say from soup to nuts, or you could say from good to evil. Yes. So on one level, the story in Eden is literally true. Women this was actually mentioned by Carl Sagan. God, now I can't remember his book. But a noted atheist. I think the name of his book is The Dragons of Eden. And he points out that, in a way, the story in the Garden of Eden is literally true. Women give birth in pain because we have knowledge of many things, which makes our cranium very large, too large for the birth canal. But so it's still painful and dangerous. What's interesting is a biological, as an evolutionary biologist, it's sort of interesting that we didn't adapt to that women didn't. You would think if it occurred over a long enough time that women would have larger and larger hips, so there wouldn't be so much danger both to the baby and to the mother in childbirth. But I'm not going to speculate on that. So back to this theme, I would say, unlike animals, we will know the pain. And remember, I'm now focusing on the word grieve or regretting. We will know the pain in worrying about our children and the anguish like God's in seeing our creation, our children, turn out in ways other than those of our precise plan. And here is where I typically pause and say, I know this doesn't apply to anyone here, but I have heard stories that not everyone is completely thrilled with the way that their children has turned out. I'm sure everyone, here and everyone I know is completely thrilled and satisfied with the way their children turn out.
Right.
But I have heard of it. I'm sure, Cheryl, in your extensive practice, you've probably heard of those things too. So, to be even more specific, my pet cats don't worry about the fate of their kittens as these kittens reach adulthood, thinking, will they be healthy, happy, meet proper mates, and bring me delightful grand kittens? We know the pain and worry of parenting throughout our lives. And, I often, reflect that we had a congregant in my congregation in Camarillo who was well into her 90s, and she was just as worried about her daughter in her 60s as, as parents I know that are worried about their teenage kids and so on. You never stop worrying about your children. And here's the point I just mentioned, that the biological reason. So 8-7 childbearing can mean physical pain, but it can also mean worry and grieving. God, as I mentioned, regretted he had made humans on earth, and his heart was saddened, v'yitat save. How can God regret anything? What does it mean that God's heart was saddened? Perhaps God, like us, is saddened in seeing how his creation turned out. What does that teach us about God's omniscience, all-knowing, and our free will? And, a couple of quotes from the Talmud, which are very instructive here, is that everything is in the hands of heaven except yirah, except awe and fear of heaven. Whether we are going to act as though we are in awe of God or fearing God is in our hands. God doesn't control that. And even more puzzling and interesting is in the Mishnah, in the heart of the Talmud, it says, all is foreseen, yet free will is given. And that one's a fun one to discuss and tease out. Jim. You're muted, Jim.
I was unmuted. Sorry, it's twice. Just a reminder, last time we talked about this, Maimonides doesn't take this as literally as you do and
Right.
says that this is sort of just literally, it's not to be taken, it's figurative speech.
Because remember, what Maimonides is trying to do is come up with a theology. The authors of the Bible don't worry about the theology. Maimonides is trying to come up with a theology, and he has all of these problems. And the way he handles these problems is to basically say, these are human figures of speech. This, of course, is not really what happens to God, but it's the way we can understand God, because God speaks in the language of people. So you're absolutely right. But I would say, this is Maimonides is 1,000 years ago. So clearly 1,500 years after these texts are written. First Alan and then Erwin. Go ahead.
Rabbi, you made a statement about why would God care about something or be concerned? Say how you said that again. I want to build on that. You said you raised the question. God was concerned about something.
Well, so God, in the time of the flood, God is so disgusted with the way things turned out that God decides to destroy all life except for the fishes and, a few species that Noah can save in the ark.
Yeah, that wasn't the direction I wanted to go, because
I
I
often talk about a leap of faith is whether God cares about us, but I don't recall saying that recently.
Well,
I think Alan means, how can God regret anything?
Maybe that's
okay.
it.
Well, and what I was tying to something you said, thanks, Jim, is that we are also told, or Jews are told, that we were created in the image of God. And so when we're created in the image of God, the image includes some of these messy things that we become in the image of. And when you made this statement questioning how could God be anything but perfect, Well, that's
Oh no,
related to our.
I didn't say that. I asked a much narrower question, and I, unlike you, don't have the courage to say that we are messy because God is messy. Um, but but what I did say is the text says God regretted having made human. Let's see, where is
Yeah,
it? Yeah,
yeah, regret. Yeah,
he
regret is the
regretted
word. That's
having
the
made humanity on earth, and his heart was saddened. So my
yeah,
question
those
is, yeah.
right. No, those are the things that went through my mind about being reminded that we're created in the image of God, and it includes those kind of concepts that we don't always think of when we think of being in the image of God is a great thing, but it's a mixed thing because there's good things and bad things that go with that.
So what I would say is, to say it much more nicely and to try and protect my job, is I would say that just as God has free will, we have free will. That's a whole lot nicer sounding than just like God is messy and screwed up, so too we are screwed up. I would never say
Okay.
such a thing, at least not while I'm recording it and publishing it on YouTube. Um,
Okay, thank you.
let's see. So this one statement which people discuss all the time, everything is foreseen, yet free will is given. So how is that possible? How is that logically possible? And I just want to point out a way it's logically possible. God exists outside time. So the reference I often use here is, imagine you're watching, I don't know, The Shining. Okay, there's a perfect movie. Boy, I never thought about The Shining in this. Okay, a great movie, scare the living daylights off of you, and you're watching it for the fourth or fifth time, and you're saying, they're going to that place, and you're saying, don't go, oh, don't go, reject the job, do something different. Or, in the typical chainsaw slaughterer movie, the sweet young thing is going to open the door, and we know the guy with the hockey mask is behind the door with his chainsaw, and we're telling, her, don't open that door. So in the movie, she has free will, right? She doesn't have to open the door. She's a free agent in the movie. But because the movie's already made and done, we know with precision what she is going to do. So the same thing could be said about God here, that in our lives, we have free will. I would argue, my own sense is I absolutely have free will. I can take, this, I don't know, package of tissues and throw it up. I don't believe that God is controlling my actions, but you could say, if God exists outside of time, he has seen the movie. He has seen the whole movie of my life and knows what my free will choices will be. So that's at least the way I address what might seem to be a logical inconsistency. Farah, go ahead.
I think whatever we think and if we have free will or whatever God wants we do, it's not in our decision, it's God's decision. Everything happens to our life is God's decision. I think like that.
So I would say that thought is Kabbalistic, and it's very much influenced by Jewish mysticism, and it's very much influenced by Islam and living in Muslim countries, because that is definitely a part of Islam. But I would say it is not part of conventional Jewish theology, because if everything's happening according to God's will, why would God punish us for sins?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's the problem. I have lots of problems with God and theology, and that is a main one. But I'll give you an example, and I wish I could remember the Arabic for this. But you see a beggar begging on the street. So in Midrash, in Jewish rabbinic stories, there is a story that says, the rabbi is teaching his students, and he's saying there's a time for everything, and he has a wise ass student who says, "Oh yeah, is there time that for being an atheist?" And of course, the rabbi, being even wiser than his wise ass student, would say, "Yes, there are times when you should act as an atheist, And the students think about it. He says, well, when would that be? And he says, if you see a beggar in need, you have to act as though there is no God, and it's up to you to help that person. And I like that very much. And then I learned from Sonia that on the streets of Morocco, when someone was begging and having a terrible luck or whatever, a typical Arabic expression used that would be to pass the person by would be Allah will provide for you. So I don't have to give you, food or money or whatever. It's up to Allah, because God is in control of everything. So it's a different theology. Remember, Yisrael means to struggle with God. Islam means to submit to the will of God. Okay. I
Rabbi,
don't think. Yes. Go ahead.
I never asked this question, but God says that Adam was created to the image of God, or man was created of image of God. Why didn't God create Havel the same way as Adam?
Create Chava?
What? Yeah.
Why didn't the woman? So we have two stories of creation. Actually, we're going to get into this, maybe not this week, but I have an article that we're going to read on this subject. But in the first story of creation, God creates Adam, which you should translate as humanity,
Yes.
male and female, in the
Yes.
image of God. So God says, let us make humanity in our image. And God created them in God's image, male and female, he created them. So in the first story, God creates man and woman simultaneously, and they are in God's image. In the second story, again, a simple plain reading, is God creates the man. It doesn't say anything about creating the man in God's image, and then does some kind of surgery, which we talked about earlier, on the man to create the woman. So in the story where it speaks about being created in God's image, it applies both to male and female.
I see.
Okay, so now the question is, did the serpent speak truth? And by the way, I didn't cover this because it's a little more subtle, but in the man earning his living be'etzev, in pain, the way Kushner discusses that is, we will suffer the pain of being drawn away from the things we really know we should be doing or want to be doing to earn our bread. So do you go to your kids' sporting games and birthday parties and things like that? Or do you spend, another late night at the office? Are you completely honest in your business dealings, or do you cut corners? So there's a lot of pain and regret involved in earning your living. I didn't have a slide on that one. Okay, so I want to jump now to the question of, did the serpent speak truth? So the serpent says in the conversation with the woman, the serpent said to the woman, surely you shall not die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, the fruit, then your eyes will be opened and you will be as gods or like God. And the Hebrew is Elohim, knowing good and evil. And here there's another wonderful discussion of Hebrew, because Elohim can mean gods, plural, lowercase g. The gods of other nations would be called Elohim. And Elohim is also used in our text to mean God, capital G, singular. And it can also mean like gods, or it can even mean judges. So, but the serpent says, you're not going to die. And we know they don't die on the day they eat of it. And now the question we're going to see, are their eyes open, or do they become like gods? And then in Genesis 3:7, after they eat of the fruit, it says, and the eyes of both of them were open. And in 3:22, I'm jumping forward in the text, God says, Adonai, God, so this is Yud He Vav He Elohim, says, behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And so of course, they don't die on that day, but they, unlike animals and babies, become aware of their mortality and how precious life is. So everything the serpent says is true. Farah, and then Jim.
God says Adam will be one of us. What means from us? Is
Yeah,
only
so so God in throughout most of the Bible, God speaks in the first person singular. So specifically in the Ten Commandments, God says, "I am the Lord thy God who took you out of Egypt to be your God." So God continually speaks first person singular. In the creation story, God speaks in the first person plural. Let us make humankind in our image. So the traditional Christian answer, because it's the easiest one, is that God is threefold in nature, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So it makes perfect sense to use the word us. And in the traditional Jewish understanding of this, God is talking to the heavenly host, the angels and the seraphim, and so on. In the example in creation, I like to think that God was talking to the animals, but it doesn't quite work here. But that's the traditional explanation. Jim.
Okay, there's a bit that you didn't write there. At the beginning of chapter 3, the serpent asked the woman, "Did God really tell you not to eat of any of the trees in the garden?" Now that's not true, and the serpent
Oh, the
knew.
serpent's asking a question.
Yeah, but he knew it wasn't true. He's leading her
I'm
on.
sorry. I'm sorry, Jim. I will have the court reporter reread the text. The serpent didn't say that this is what God said. The serpent innocently asks, or maybe not innocently asks, did God tell us not to eat any of the fruit? And I actually think the significance of that question was to engage her in a conversation. Because suppose the serpent said, did God tell you not to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil? The answer would have been simple. Yes, that's what God told us. End of discussion. We don't have this interesting dialogue. But so that part of it, while I agree with you, is open-ended and misleading, because it says the serpent was subtle and shrewd. Um, um, so I agree with you. The serpent is subtle and shrewd, but nothing that he says is wrong. And the woman says, "No, God didn't tell us to eat of any fruit, only this particular fruit, and not to eat it and not to touch it," she says. And and then the serpent says, "You will not die. But on the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods or like God." And that turns out to be true. When they eat it, their eyes were opened, and God recognizes that they have become godlike, knowing many things, including good and evil. Let's see, we're going to continue. So here's the same verse, 3:22. And Adonai God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now, what if he puts forth his hand and takes also from the tree of life and eats and live forever?" So now that we ate of the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, we find out we ate from the wrong damn tree. We should have eaten from the tree of life and live forever. So Adonai God send them out of the garden of Eden to till the ground from where he was taken. And he drives them out, not because of any supposed sin and not because of any punishment, but simply to protect us from eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life, because if we had access to the tree of life, Irwin would have written a much more popular book, which is How to Live Forever, and by eating of that fruit, and that would have been sold more copies than the book that both he and I wrote multiplied together. But we ate from the wrong damn tree, and so God doesn't want us to live forever. That's an interesting question. Why doesn't God want us to live forever? So he drove out the man. I'm now just reading from Exodus 3:24, and he placed cherubs, cheruvim, at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so everybody clear on this? Everything the serpent says is true. The problem we have now is now that we really know a lot of stuff, we realize you might respond by using the Hebrew word duh, but now we realize that if we ate from the tree of life, that we would live forever, and God doesn't want us to be immortal. So God kicks us out of the garden and places cheruvim, which is plural, cherubs, to guard the way to the tree of life, and a flaming sword, which turned every way. So everybody clear on? Go ahead.
Does God accept somebody else to come in the Garden of Eden?
Oh, God knows. I'm not aware of anybody else going into the Garden of Eden.
So there are. I remember three different places where the cherubs gardening
Oh,
something with
yeah,
the
we're going to
sword.
get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. That's actually the very next thing we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Okay. So the role of the cherubs, cheruvim. So he drove
Okay.
out the man and placed cherubs at the east of the garden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. That's what we read in Genesis. The next time, and maybe this is what you were leading to, Erwin, is the next time we meet the cherubs is in Exodus 25, when Moses is building the tabernacle and God is giving detailed instructions on actually how to build the Ark of the Covenant. So this is now Exodus 25:17. It's a little long, but what else do we have to do? And you shall make a cover of pure gold, 2 cubits and a half. Cubits about 1.5 feet. So 2 cubits and a half would be like 1.5 feet, 3 feet, a little over 4 feet. Shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its breadth. And you shall make 2 cheruvim, make 2 cherubs of gold, of hammered workmanship you shall make them, on the 2 ends of the cover, and make 1 cherub on one end, and the other cherub on the other end, and of the cover you will make the cheruvim on its 2 ends. And the cheruvim will stretch out their wings on high, covering the cover with their wings, and their faces shall look to one another. Toward the cover shall the faces of the cheruvim be. And you shall put the cover upon the ark, and in the ark you will put the testimony that I'm about to give you, the Torah, or the tablets of the law. And there I will meet with you, and I will talk with you from above the cover, from between the 2 cheruvim, which are on the ark of testimony, of all the things which I will give you in commandment to the people of Israel. So now, mathematics. If the cheruvim in Genesis are guarding the tree of life, and if the cheruvim in Exodus are guarding the Torah, drum roll please, the Torah is the tree of life. And we sing that at every service. We sing, Etz Hayim Hi Lemachazikim Bao. We're saying she, namely the Torah, is the tree of life. And so, does the Torah give us eternal life? Yes, Jim, the Jews are still around. We don't have it as individuals, but every other people on earth has been wiped out, but not the Jews, in spite of the fact that virtually every other nation has tried to wipe us out. So, Etz Chaim Chi, she is a tree of life. The Torah is the tree of life. So what do cheruvim look like? Oh, I don't want to put that up. So what do cheruvim look like? What do cherubs look like? Anybody have any ideas? No.
I don't know, because for instance, in the story of Balaam and Balak, is the cherubim is angry, or has a sword next to the donkey.
Oh no, I think that's an angel, but it'd be worth double checking. But yeah, so you might be right. I'm just not sure. I think it's an angel. But okay. But typically when people think of cherubs, what do you think of?
Little babies.
Babies. What kind of babies?
Chubby little babies.
Chubby little babies. Okay, good. Chubby little babies with wings. Thank you. You're thinking of this guy.
No.
So down here in the corner. I'm saying Jim's thinking of it. Erwin, I'm not saying you're thinking of it. So in Genesis, so the question is, what do cherubim look like? What do cherubs look like? So what do we have in the Bible that helps us answer this question? From the book of Genesis, we know that they can hold a flaming sword. From Exodus, we are told they have wings and faces from the material that I just read. And there are other more fanciful descriptions, which I really ought to take a look at, in Ezekiel. But here's an image that you will sometimes see describing the way the Ark of the Covenant looked. So there are two cherubs, and they are facing down. They have faces, and they have wings covering them. So the question is, why do we think of them as little babies? So I once read an account of this, and of course it's a pun in Aramaic. I'm sure that everyone was about to guess that. So the cherubim is the plural of keruv, which means childlike in Aramaic. So cherubim would mean childlike. So apparently that may be, I'm actually not sure, how we got the idea that they are fat little babies with wings. So go ahead, Erwin. You wanted to say something.
If you go to Etzhaim,
Yes.
and you ever saw the?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't have to describe it.
Well,
and
for others, but there's this beautiful image of the
yeah,
cherubim above the ark in
Yeah.
in the synagogue, conservative synagogue in Thousand Oaks. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. And okay, so I was teaching this in my interfaith work, and one of my Mormon friends came up with this, and I had never heard this before, but it's worth reading because it introduces the next interesting question to discuss. And so this is from the Book of Mormon, and there's the reference. And now behold, if Adam had not transgressed, he would have not fallen, and he would have remained in the Garden of Eden. And all things which were created must have remained in the same state in which they were after they were created, and they must remain forever and had no end, and they would have no children. Whenceforth they would have remained in a state of innocence, having no joy, for they knew no misery, doing no good, for they knew no sin. And behold, all things have been done in the wisdom of him who knoweth all things. Adam fell that men might be, and men are, that they might have joy. So I was astounded to hear that, because ultimately, now remember, the Book of Mormon and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is it's a church that sanctifies Jesus. There's an argument in the Christian world whether they really are Christian. I won't get into that, but certainly they would describe themselves as Christian. But they come up with what I think would be the same conclusion that Kushner comes up with, and I think I may have that here. Okay, yeah, so here's the bottom lines on the story. So for me, the most important bottom line is that the Hebrew Bible is open to many readings, and more than one can be true. So I would never say a Christian reading of this text is not true. Islam doesn't adopt the text, doesn't adopt the Hebrew Bible in its entirety in the Quran, but it does have Garden of Eden stories, and it's very different from these stories. And presumably coming from the same source. So in this particular Jewish reading, and other Jewish readings are possible as well. So when you start reading in the Talmud, there are lots of references to the Garden of Eden and sin and so on. They're not in the biblical text, but they are certainly in the Talmud. But in this Jewish reading, there is no reference to sin. The story is an allegory of our becoming human and becoming adult, and about the importance of human free will. So the question, which actually I should put the Mormon discussion after this, what if they had not eaten? So this is a really interesting question. If this is a question that people struggle with. I've never heard, in a Jewish context, I've never heard a rabbi, in a sermon talking about what if we had not eaten of the fruit in the Garden of Eden. Jim, do you hear that in your world, in a Catholic world? Is there a lot of speculation? If only we hadn't eaten
We
from the
wouldn't
fruit.
be here now.
Hold on, that we're going to interpret that. I'm just wondering whether this comes up in Catholic discussions.
Only from Father Dave Heaney,
Ah,
who says that we would have lived as God had intended us to. Uh, and there was work in the garden because Adam was told to tend the garden, and God said, I'll give you childbearing pain. He said there was pain there because God said, I'll increase your pain.
that's only after they eat the fruit.
Yeah, but he said, I'll increase your pain, meaning you had pain before,
Oh,
but I'm
okay,
going to
okay,
give you
yeah,
more.
yeah, yes, okay, okay, thank you.
So
And by the
I
way,
don't,
Father Dave and I are going to have a rabbi priest dialogue in the university series in March this year. Alan, hold on a
Jim,
second, hold on, Erwin. Alan, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand why one would even stop and start to this process of what if this and didn't happen, because there's an infinite number of those things in the Bible, right? What if Moses didn't hit the rock?
Yeah,
What
okay,
if Neshwan didn't step into the sea?
okay,
I mean,
but
so
I'm
I'm
raising,
kind of
yeah, okay.
yeah, yeah, yes. I could we can enjoy this. It's just that why select that particular item?
Well,
That's all.
because it's, and certainly in Christian thought, and I would say that Christian thought pervades our culture, this is the fall of man and fallen angels and original sin. So, and so there's this idea that we screwed up. So whenever I screw up, I generally have the thought, if only I hadn't screwed up. So anyway, so here's again
Okay.
sort of my summarizing Rabbi Kushner's take. If they hadn't eaten, no work, no pain, but Jim, I think you have a good point. Children don't need parents. Parents don't need children. No tears, no laughter, no longing for something we don't have, no joy in getting it, no deep knowledge of good, evil, or anything else. So, and it's interesting that that's basically what the Book of Mormon is coming up with as well. And in short, the woman is the heroine of the story. She is the one who brings free will into the story. She is the one that elevates humanity into humanity and beyond the animal world. And we, created in God's image, have serious problems to agonize over and work on. And this is just what God intended, to make us a partner in making the world a better place. And if we didn't have these problems uh, um, in the world, we would have no work to do, and we couldn't be worthy of being created in God's image. I can't remember if I have, no, I don't have anything else. So that's the conclusion of what I wanted to say here. And I'll let we can discuss it for a few minutes. And next Monday we are meeting. We are meeting this Wednesday, but not next Wednesday, because next Wednesday is Erev Thanksgiving, the night before Thanksgiving. And and I will be out of town. So any comments on your take on?
I,
Go
I,
ahead.
I have a comment, and I believe that the whole reason that Adam and Eve sinned because God created us with faulty hearing, and we don't listen. And that's the problem of Adam and Eve.
But
That's a problem.
you don't really mean faulty hearing. You mean disobedience.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I
We
mean,
don't listen. We don't listen to the commandment. Okay,
right.
uh, and that was a commandment: don't eat from the fruit. Noah was rescued by God, and he becomes drunk because he doesn't listen. And I can go all the way down the line
Yes.
in every parsha.
So I would absolutely agree with you, except I would characterize it slightly differently, is that it's not that God created us not to listen or to be disobedient, but I would say, in the words of the Talmud, that the decision to obey the commandments or disobey the commandments is left up to us. God doesn't force us to obey the commandments.
Well, God tells us if you obey the commandment, you're gonna be fruitful and multiply. If you
No,
don't
actually,
obey,
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
basically, not exactly.
Yes.
But if you don't obey the commandment, you're going to be punished.
And
So,
therefore, it's clear that God is leaving up to us the decision whether to obey or disobey.
okay. And
So we have
I
free
have
will. I mean, to me,
yeah.
that's the critical issue. Do we have free will? And the decision to obey or disobey, is that in our hands? Or, as as Farah said, and I think Islam would say, or it's really all in God's hands.
Well, how can we disobey the commandment if we don't hear it? If you don't listen to it properly?
Well, so when you say listen to it properly, I don't know if you're talking about an audiological problem, which I have solved using these devices.
Well,
Uh,
God didn't give you that.
you don't think so? God created everything. You don't believe God created these hearing aids? So anyway, I think you're talking about disobedience when you're saying listen to the
Yeah,
commandments.
yeah.
You're not talking about the physical ability to hear them.
And I want to ask a question for Jim. That when he said that God uh, didn't, God, we don't live as God wanted to live properly. But how about, I don't know too much about the Christian religion, but I think nuns and priests are commanded to live the way God wanted us to live.
Oh, I don't know,
And
Jim.
from
So I would,
the-
yeah,
and
so I would
from-
say Jim is saying, quoting Father Henny, who I know very well,
yes,
is saying the same thing you're saying, Erwin, that we don't obey the commandments. And what I would say is, in the world of priests and nuns, they take upon themselves additional spiritual discipline, such
yes,
as an ultra-Orthodox Jew might or a Kabbalist might, and they live in accordance with a higher level of spiritual discipline. And some of them, obey those disciplines, and some of them don't, and they leave the priesthood and they leave the sisterhood. I don't know, Jim, if you want to add anything, or if you think I
No, that's
covered
it.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, Ken.
In answer to Irwin's thing about not hearing, there's the age-old legal maximum, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So that you could throw that into the mix too.
I mean, and that's why we're commanded to study these texts and live according to halacha, live according to Jewish law, and and parents are supposed to teach their children. Clearly, a newborn child doesn't know what's kosher and what's not kosher, just to pick one set of laws. But presumably, by the time they're 12 or 13, they have been instructed by their parents, this is what you're supposed to do, and this is what you're not supposed to do. Farah.
There is a movie, Disobedience, regarding the Jewish in Canopy, and it's very interesting because the rabbi in the end says that God said you are free to choose. So if you want, you can see that on Canopy.
So
Canopy?
I mean, it's very clear to me that we are free to choose. And, in the book of Deuteronomy, basically, it's exactly what Irwin says. If we obey the laws, good things will happen to us. If we disobey the laws, bad things will happen to us. And then
Yeah,
God begs us to choose obedience to the law. By the way, the
yeah,
problem with that is it's not true. Is there are many people who disobey laws and get away with it, and there are many people who obey laws and seem to have a miserable life. And so that's another theological problem.
yeah.
But the book of Deuteronomy is quite simplistic, but it leaves to us the choice. So my take on the Garden of Eden was right with the first man and the first woman. We needed to have a story which underlines the fact that we have free will, because I think those stories in Genesis are stories of origins, of why do men and women want to become one flesh again. And it's because they were one flesh until God separated the two. Why does snakes give us the creeps? It goes back to Eden. And so these are sort of stories of origin. Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts?
Just a reminder about Wednesday.
Oh
The
yeah, so
extra.
yes, thank you, Alan, for reminding me. So Wednesday we are having a class, and the subject is the rainbow, which is perfect for what we've been going through. Although we actually have to, now speaking as a physicist, you need a little sun at the right angle to create a rainbow. But I found a good article about the rainbow in various traditions. But before we dive into that subject, Alan is going to report on having spent a lot of time in the last few weeks in Israel. And, I'm looking forward to hearing from him on that subject. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Alan.
Just that the centerpiece, and then I know the rabbi has asked me, and I will try to wrap it with what you just said, is that I went to the World Union for Progressive Judaism conference. I went to ordinations in Jerusalem for Israeli Reform rabbis being ordained, and I went to Berlin, Germany, where European Reform rabbis were ordained. And so I have a few
Oh,
things to share about that.
Rabbi, I have a question. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but I heard last Friday was the 25th anniversary of the rabbi who is responsible for the reform movement.
Okay, let me jump in.
Go ahead.
On Friday, the Rabbi Rick Jacobs is the current president of the Union for Reform Judaism. He spoke on the 25th yahrzeit of Rabbi Alexander Schindler, who was the
Yes, yes.
head of the Reform movement up till around 1992, when Rabbi Eric Yaffe became president, and then his successor was Rick. I think you were really just referring to Schindler, not to the other
Yes,
ones.
yes.
And
Yeah, okay.
he was a very powerful and influential voice in Reform Judaism, but most people would trace the beginning of Reform Judaism back to Isaac Mayer Weiss, which is when he founded Hebrew Union College. He founded what is now the Union for Reform Judaism, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis, um, and that was 125 years ago.
I thought that Stephen Wise was the one of the most important
Stephen
persons.
Weiss was very important. I can't remember exactly when, but
Well,
he
in
was
the
another
1990,
major voice in Reform Judaism. And then his movement combined the two schools combined. So the
Oh,
technical name of the college that I graduated from is Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. He founded Stephen S. Weiss founded the Jewish Institute of Religion. Isaac Mayer Weiss, no relation that I'm aware of, founded Hebrew Union College.
I saw in PBS that Stephen Weiss was the first person that went to Roosevelt and asked for go to the war with the German.
He was the first person. I didn't quite understand what you
He
said.
went to President Roosevelt regarding that go to the war with the Germans. Asked for
To go to
Jewish,
war with the Germans.
yeah.
Yeah, he was a very public, very influential, very powerful speaker. And I would say the movements combined, the Isaac Mayer Weiss tradition combined with the Stephen S. Weiss tradition. And you will find synagogues, one in I guess in Los Angeles, called Stephen S. Weiss synagogue. Yeah,
Mulholland.
on Mulholland, right?
They
Okay.
they recently dropped the S. Don't ask me why.
Oh, that's interesting. So now it's just Stephen Weiss.
I mean,
and
it's
that and
a
that
sugar,
Can you
right?
imagine the length of the meeting, the committee meeting it took to make
Right.
that important decision?
Yeah, this
and
is
and
what
think
the
think of the
result
cost
of
of
what?
think of the well, because it's electronic, the change could be a quick find replace, but think of all the printed things and the signs and everything
Yeah.
that is
So,
affected
so
in New York City. It was Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, which has its own origins of why it got
right.
titled that way. But yeah, right.
So George Carlin once had a funny routine. in talking about Sears, and he said, "What happened to Roebuck?" No, it was Sears Roebuck, right? So he talked about
I
there
mean,
must be
yeah,
some deep, dark conspiracy to get rid of Roebuck, and I have no idea.
well, but companies do that. I mean, Apple, it was Apple Computer until they started making phones and they changed it
Right,
to Apple.
right.
Yeah, so companies do that.
And I still don't even have a middle name. So on that happy note, I will wish you a good evening. Stay dry, and see some of you and on Wednesday. And stay well and take care. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So
Good night.
much.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thanks, Rabbi.